The Subcommittee on Technology and Innovation will come to order. Good morning. Welcome to today's hearing entitled An Overview of the National Institute of Standards and Technology Budget for Fiscal Year 2013. In front of you are packets containing the written testimony, biographies, and truth in testimony disclosures for today's witness. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. Today we will be discussing the fiscal year 2013 budget request for the National Institute of Standards and Technology and gathering details about NIST's priorities. I would like to thank Dr. Gallagher for appearing before us today. NIST has been well served by your leadership. Before getting into the specifics of NIST's request, I would like to briefly discuss the President's 2013 budget proposal. Unfortunately, the budget submitted by the administration a few weeks ago continues to promote the same failed policies that have made our economic situation worse. The President's budget includes the most government spending in history, the biggest tax increase in American history, and the biggest debt in history. This proposal increases overall spending $200 billion to a total of $3.8 trillion, nearly a quarter of our gross domestic product. The budget will increase taxes on American families and job creators by $1.9 trillion, while paying lip service to the need to cut debt and deficits. Under the President's framework, our gross national debt will increase from $15 trillion today to approximately $26 trillion 10 years from now. The administration has failed to rein in spending and has failed to lay out a credible plan for bringing the deficit and debt under control. This is unsustainable and irresponsible. Today, we examine one portion of the budget proposal, the President's fiscal year 2013 budget request for NIST. While NIST is a smaller agency, this request does not exist within a vacuum and must be weighed in the context of our fiscal situation. NIST is a non-regulatory laboratory of the federal government tasked with making contributions to our nation's innovation and industrial competitiveness by advancing measurement science, standards, and technology. NIST works closely alongside industry to make sure their activities improve the quality of life of Americans and the economic security of our nation. Although we may not be aware of NIST's impact in our lives, NIST research advances a variety of national priorities and challenges related to advanced manufacturing and materials, nanotechnology, cybersecurity, health information technology, advanced communications networks, and disaster resilience. The fiscal year 2013 budget request for NIST totals $857 million, an increase of $106.2 million, or 14.1% from the fiscal year 2012 enacted level. The Committee on Science, Space, and Technology has a long bipartisan record of support for NIST and its contributions. Given the value of NIST research to our nation's competitiveness, we are strongly supportive of NIST's scientific and technical research and services. We also recognize the work of NIST's industrial technology services. However, I believe we need to do a better job of prioritizing our investments, and a 14.1% budget increase is simply unrealistic in our current fiscal environment. While we can all agree that the research NIST conducts is important for our economy, we simply cannot afford to continue spending at these rates given our current fiscal reality. I have every reason to believe that NIST will continue to conduct innovative research while seeking ways to improve the efficiency of its programs so that this research is undertaken in a fiscally responsible manner. I am appreciative of the opportunity to learn more about how fiscal year 2013 funds will be prioritized by NIST, and I thank our witness, Dr. Gallagher, for his time today. I now recognize the gentlelady from Maryland, the ranking member, Ms. Edwards, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Quayle, and thank you very much for holding today's hearing to examine the administration's fiscal year 2013 budget request from the National Institutes of Standards and Technology. And I want to thank Dr. Gallagher also for appearing before us this morning and for your leadership at NIST. And while it would be interesting to hold a hearing about the overall budget priorities in the administration's budget, our task today is really specifically with respect to NIST and putting that into a context in which we examine where we want to be in terms of our future in manufacturing and research and development and NIST's role in that. And so it is that framework from which I'll be asking questions today, because I'm sure Dr. Gallagher doesn't have expertise on the larger federal budget. And although NIST is a relatively small agency, it's an extremely important player in federal efforts to spur innovation and economic prosperity in the country. And for more than 100 years, NIST has supported the competitiveness of U.S. industry by advancing measurement, science, standards, and technology. NIST's broad and deep technical expertise, as well as its ability to serve as a bridge to U.S. businesses, is really unparalleled. And I'm pleased that the President's fiscal year 2013 budget request draws on the strengths of NIST and gives the agency a prominent role in the administration's strategy to revitalize American manufacturing. And I think there's no one in this country who couldn't agree that we have to revitalize American manufacturing in order to be competitive for the 21st century, and NIST's role in that is really paramount. Since 2000, the U.S. has lost over 650,000 high-tech manufacturing jobs. It's really shocking. Our trade deficit in advanced technology products is growing, and China is now the world's biggest exporter of high technology goods. The truth is that our position as the global leader in innovation and technology is being threatened as developing nations build up their capabilities to become not only the technology assembly line, but also the creator of new and innovative technologies. That is linking manufacturing with their domestic production capacity. The administration's budget proposal includes a number of initiatives that can reverse these disturbing manufacturing trends. For example, the establishment of industry-led public-private consortia is exactly what the doctor ordered to address the pre-competitive challenges faced by U.S. companies. The Advanced Manufacturing Technology Consortia, or AMTEC, program included in the budget request will tackle technical issues that are prohibiting the growth of advanced manufacturing here at home and will provide a foundation for new and existing companies to flourish, producing high-quality, well-paying jobs, which are the key to the growth of our economy and the middle class. I'm interested in learning more today about the administration's proposal to launch a national network for manufacturing innovation. From what I gather, this proposal is based in part on a successful model the Fraunhofer Institutes will have a chance to talk about later, implemented in Germany with the support of its government. This is certainly a promising model that I believe we should fully explore in this country, and I'm eager to hear whether the network is in fact intended to spur these sorts of public-private research partnerships. Again, another example of the international community in investing in advanced manufacturing and the United States taking a back seat. We hope to change that today and hope to do that with the President's budget. And so whether you agree with it or not, the truth is most of our competitors are putting significant targeted resources toward helping businesses, small and large, accelerate commercialization of innovative technologies. The current budget request finalizes the termination of the Technology Innovation Program, or TIP, and it marks the first time in years that NIST, in 25 years in fact, that NIST lacks a mechanism to provide competitive grants to U.S. companies to accelerate the development of promising technologies that hold the potential for significant commercial payoff and widespread benefit for the United States. I'm troubled by the void that will be left by the termination of TIP, and I'm interested in exploring with the Chairman and Undersecretary Gallagher the possibility of establishing a new program or even reconstituting a previous one at NIST for this important purpose. I'm also interested in learning more today about how the current budget request will advance NIST efforts in forensic science. As you know, the National Research Council released a report in 2009 that highlighted the fragmented nature of forensic science in the United States and expressed concern over the lack of a rigorous scientific base for the field. The NRC also emphasized the role NIST can and should play in addressing the identified weaknesses, and I applaud the strategic initiative outlined in NIST budget proposal and look forward to hearing how this initiative will strengthen forensic science. We could go on, but Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you again for holding the hearing, and I look forward to working with you and our colleagues to ensure that NIST has the resources it needs to fulfill its critical role in promoting innovation, commercialization, and business growth. And with that, I yield the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ms. Edwards. If there are members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point. At this time, I would like to introduce our witness. Our witness is Dr. Patrick Gallagher, the Undersecretary of Commerce for Standards and Technology at the Director of the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Thanks again to our witness for being here this morning. As our witness should know, spoken testimony is limited to 5 minutes. After presenting your spoken testimony, members of the committee will have 5 minutes each to ask questions. I now recognize our witness, Dr. Patrick Gallagher, for 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Edwards. I want to thank you both for your kind words in recognition of my leadership and the work of NIST. I want to recognize and thank all the members of the committee, subcommittee, for your support to NIST and for the opportunity to testify today about the administration's fiscal year 2013 request for NIST. This year's request can be summarized in 2 words, advanced manufacturing. The President's request reflects his strong commitment to accelerate the pace of innovation and to better enable the transfer of technologies and products to help American manufacturers to, as Secretary Bryson put it, make it here and sell it everywhere. NIST is an agency whose mission, rooted in the Constitution, is specifically charged with supporting U.S. industry, and especially the manufacturing sector, by advancing measurement science, supporting standards, and testing and accelerating commercialization of new technologies. This year's request builds on our past successes and on your past support of our mission. The overall discretionary request for fiscal 13 is $857 million. This is an increase of $106 million from the fiscal year 12 enacted level. And to just focus on the significance of manufacturing to our request, over $156 million in total is dedicated to areas specifically part of advanced manufacturing related programs and activities. NIST discretionary budget contains 3 accounts, and let me briefly summarize them. The request for our laboratory programs, which is the largest program at NIST, is $648 million. This is an increase of $81 million. Over half of that proposed increase is focused specifically on advanced manufacturing. The remaining increase includes targeted areas of research in advanced communications, forensics, disaster resilience, and the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace, or NSTIC, and for the establishment of centers of excellence to accelerate innovation through knowledge transfer and collaboration. The request for the Industrial Technology Services account is $149 million. This is an increase of $20 million over FY12. Within that account is a request for $128 million for the Hollings Manufacturing Extension Partnership Program and $21 million for the Advanced Manufacturing Technology Consortia, or AMTEC. AMTEC will support R&D in advanced manufacturing and strengthen long-term U.S. leadership in critical and emerging technologies. Our construction of research facilities request is $60 million. This is an increase of nearly $5 million. The CRF account funds construction and facility maintenance and operations activities on both of our campuses. This request includes funds for the renovation of the 60-year-old Building 1 in Boulder, Colorado, which is completely inadequate and cannot support our scientific mission at this time. The request also proposes 2 mandatory accounts. The first one would provide $300 million to address and support critical barriers to innovation and accelerate the delivery of new products and services for public safety communication. This program was included in the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act of 2011, which was recently signed into law. The second account would catalyze a national network for manufacturing innovation. The President views this one-time investment of $1 billion as crucial to revitalizing U.S. manufacturing. This program would be in direct collaboration between NIST, the National Science Foundation, the Department of Defense, and the Department of Energy. And we look forward to working with this committee on the necessary legislation to establish this program. Mr. Chairman, NIST's mission is to work with industry to benefit the competitive American industry, and it could not be more relevant to today's challenges. This concludes my testimony, and I'm looking forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Gallagher. Now I want to remind members that committee rules limit questioning to 5 minutes. The chair will at this point open the round of questions, and I recognize myself for 5 minutes. I first want to just get off, at the end of your testimony, you said how NIST works well with industry, and you absolutely do, and it's a great way to show how the regulatory body and also industry can actually work together to come up with the type of standards that will work for everybody. But I want to go to one of the mandatory programs that you were talking about. And so in the request proposed the creation of a mandatory $1 billion account to establish a multi-agency national network of manufacturing innovation aimed at bridging the gap between lab and the market. And I'm a little skeptical of the proposal just because, if I understand, NIST would be charged with leading a program with a funding level that is greater than its total annual budget. We haven't received any justification describing how this account may differ from the MEP or from AMTEC program that the administration is proposing. So could you please describe the reason for this new account and also what role NIST will play in managing it?
Thank you. So as you, I think, know that the details of the National Network of Manufacturing Institutes has not been really announced except for this sort of framework that was included in the request. So I actually don't have a lot of detail at this time to share with you, and I understand that that's going to be announced quite shortly. What I can tell you is that the program is specifically looking at stimulating private sector R&D. That advanced manufacturing in particular depends on a robust transfer of knowledge from research and development into industry. And the President laid out a goal, I think, when he first came into office, that we had to increase the R&D intensity in the United States. Well, the majority of R&D in the United States is private sector. And so the focus here is really to create a venue where companies can pool resources and invest in that transfer of R&D to industry. With regards to the capacity within NIST, you're quite correct. It would be a sizable account. It's one-time funding, so it would be presumably available over some period of time. So on an annual basis, this probably is not exceeding what we would have managed in the past. It certainly would not exceed what we dealt with successfully under the Recovery Act. So I think we're comfortable there, and I think also the fact that all of the science agencies are directly involved, Defense, Energy, NSF, also brings a lot of capacity to the table.
I guess, do you know, or can you provide any insight onto how the $1 billion number was chosen? I mean, we haven't gotten any of the details, and I look forward to seeing what the details are. But when you have a mandatory program that is outside of the congressional appropriation process, immediately you kind of start to raise some alarm bells, just because the mandatory spending that we're incurring year over year, obviously this is a one-time expenditure, but those things are troubling to me, especially without any of the details coming out of the administration yet.
And it is hard for me to answer your question without any of those same details out there. But and so, I think we would want to work closely with you as soon as those details are out. It would be clearly require legislation to put into place, and I think the justification for the size is probably related to the intensity of effort. And again, I hope that's part of the announcement as well.
And I was just also going at, is there any duplication amongst, I mean, when we're talking about manufacturing program, is there any duplication amongst NIST extramural programs, the MEP and the proposed AMTech? I just want to make sure that we aren't overlapping in areas that we don't need to and making things as efficient as possible.
So as you can imagine, looking at program overlap and program efficiency, particularly across agencies, has been a high priority. So there's been a lot of effort at the interagency level making sure these things are not in duplication. Certainly in the context of NIST, this has really no resemblance at all to MEP. MEP is a public-private partnership, that's true. It also includes partnerships directly with the states. But the purpose of that program is to support small and mid-sized businesses, existing manufacturers, to make them more competitive, accelerate their adoption of new technologies. The Innovation Network is really about supporting advanced R&D efforts by industry in a collaborative way.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I will now recognize the Ranking Member, Ms. Edwards, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Dr. Gallagher, for your testimony. I am curious as to where you perceive the gaps that this budget attempts to fill with respect to pushing forward on the President's agenda for more advanced manufacturing and developing that capacity that's coupled with an R&D capacity. And I referred in my opening statement to the Fraunhofer Institutes and wonder if you could discuss in this budget the relationship between what you see, for example, in Germany and other countries doing and where we're trying to get to and how that's accomplished in the budget.
So I think that as soon as you look at advanced manufacturing, it's really the intersection between our capacity to innovate new technologies and our capacity to produce and sell them. That's really the nexus we're talking about. So the role of NIST in that space, we don't produce anything. So our real role is to work with industry to support what? It's really the advancement of the measurement capacity that enables those new technologies to move from a laboratory environment into the market. That's quite a transformation. And in some cases, the standards infrastructure or the standards framework that drives both those technologies and the markets that they go into. So the gaps that we are always looking at are the ones where there's an emerging technology arena, where the technology space is quite new, and we want to advantage the producers in the United States to exploit those new technologies. So most of the increases that you see in our 13 request are in emerging technology areas, looking at nanotechnology and biotechnology, looking at advanced smart manufacturing infrastructure that's needed. With the context to Fraunhofer's, I don't want to speculate on how much the Fraunhofer specifically have been a model for what's been proposed, but there's been a lot of interest in looking at the German model of partnership, because what's intriguing about the institutes is that they combine very efficiently, apparently, a federal government, state government, and industry partnership. And I think that's probably intrinsic to almost anything we do in manufacturing, because you're coupling this public sector funded R&D enterprise with a robust private sector funded and carried out commercial activity. And making sure we don't have unnecessary barriers there is really the heart of the matter.
Thank you. And I want to go for a minute to the TIP program. The budget for fiscal year 2013 doesn't include any funding for new projects within the Technology Innovation Program, which is aimed at speeding the development of industry-led high-risk transformative research. This decision comes on the heels of the previous budget, FY12 appropriations bill, that failed to provide any funding to TIP and forced NIST to begin the process of shutting the program down. I wonder if you could talk for a minute about the decision to end TIP and the void that's going to be left at NIST and the federal government as a whole by the termination of the program. And I wonder if you can relate that to the predecessor ATP program, because I'm looking at the advanced technology program that existed and the number of successes that that program had. And can you relate the two? And is this an area that we need to reconsider?
So thank you. I think you're correct. The TIP program was defunded for 12, and we are currently in the process of shutting that program down, and that's why it was not included in the 13 request. The TIP program was a bipartisan effort that came out of the First America Competes. It specifically is looking at the gap of it's in this valley of death space where it's even pre-angel and pre-VC, where you're looking at taking a technological concept and turning it into a pre-competitive technology. So while those private sector venture funds are really looking at the business risk, there's still this big problem of de-risking the technology, getting it further down the path. This has been a very natural focus as soon as innovation became one of the main drivers for R&D investments. How do you efficiently move ideas further down the path so that they can be harvested and used and exploited commercially? I think the ATP program, which was envisioned to be a civilian DARPA, looking at this high-risk, high-payoff space, was very successful in terms of the value it generated. I think TIP, while a much younger program, was showing similar signs of targeting new technologies exceptionally well. And I think really what happened was the scale of the program combined with the fiscal environment and the need to make priorities. And that's really what happened with regard to TIP.
And then would you say, would you care to characterize it? Are we really missing something here?
Well, I think, as I said, everyone who's looking at this is quite concerned about the high friction between taking what we believe to be and what I believe to be the world's best R&D enterprise and making sure that we take every advantage to be able to leverage that in terms of creating new companies, developing new products and new technologies. And we have some points in that value stream, if you will, that are very inefficient. And these programs were specifically designed. These are proof of concept type programs that are specifically designed to take a research result and demonstrate an actual concept. And you need that to be able to sort of begin the business process of developing a business. So this is not a secret. I think every S&T agency in the federal government is looking at this. States are looking at this. Other countries are looking at this and investing a lot of money in this area. And it's something that I'd like to continue to discuss and work with this committee in terms of how we effectively operate, but it's very much in this public-private space, and I think we'll have to get it right.
Thank you, Ms. Edwards. Now recognize the gentlelady from Illinois, Mrs. Biggert, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important hearing. And Dr. Gallagher, the mission of NIST is to promote U.S. innovation and competitiveness by advancing measurement, science, standards, and technology in ways that enhance economic security and improve our quality of life. And in this, I think in this role, NIST has done a good job of coordinating the development and dissemination of codes and standards for use in the private sector. I've heard that the implementation of codes and standards varies across sectors and municipalities, sometimes becoming a barrier for innovation. For example, I've heard that the innovation in the commercial kitchen equipment and laundry sector is not largely being adopted for a variety of reasons, like the cost to purchase the new standards or lack of training in enforcing them, and the level of efficiencies in those products really could offer enormous savings to taxpayers in the energy or water bills, and if they were able to use them. Does NIST also hear the same thing? And if so, could you elaborate?
Yes, thank you very much. And we hear this type of claim all the time. The United States has a very interesting and, as a result, very complex standards framework. So standards are the realm of the private sector, the federal government, and we are probably one of the only industrialized countries in the world where the standard setting is not done by government mandate. So the role of NIST is to coordinate, to make sure the best science is there, to make sure there's a sound foundation for this, to bring stakeholders together. I think it's one of the reasons our track record for working with industry is what it is, that we're both a technical but a non-regulatory agency. We can bring folks together. And of course, you're right, making a standard itself is not enough. It has to be put into meaningful practice at a broad enough cross-section of the market to make a difference. And that's often where I think the efforts flag. There's often competing interest. A standard is really a collective behavior on the part of often competing interest in companies. And so there's a lot of intrinsic tension in sort of pulling this together. And yet the advantages, as you point out, can be considerable. So we're always weighing what's our appropriate role. We don't want to supplant the natural forces in the market to make choices about what the right solutions are, but there's always very often strong public interest as well. And it may be things like municipal interest to provide safe and effective infrastructure, promote energy or water efficiency, and so forth.
Thank you. Then the release of the latest smart grid framework update, the previous version, can you explain NIST's role in the continued development of this smart grid, and specifically what steps are being taken to ensure the safety and security of the smart grid technologies?
Thank you very much. So the smart grid effort just released last week a version 2.0. We're adopting IT terminology here, of the standards framework or roadmap for smart grid. The NIST efforts really have been overtaken by what's really an all-of-industry effort now. The NIST Smart Grid Interoperability Panel has over 700 direct participants in the process, and they've made enormous progress in identifying a framework, a set of priorities, and in particular working on these new technologies. Very recently, I just received the first advisory committee report on smart grid. The keys, I think, moving forward are to develop a testing and certification framework, so very much to your first question, so that the market understands that devices that are bought and put in practice in a grid or in a home, in a business, are safe, interoperable, and meet the requirements of this overall framework, so that we turn what's really a disparate set of technologies into a functioning system, which was really the goal of the project.
In one of the communities in my district, they're putting in the home devices, and there's a lot of concern from some members of the community that it's not safe, or that it's Big Brother watching over what the use of water and all the other things that they'll be doing.
Well, you're right, and with any IT-related technology, you immediately get into very directly now concerns of cybersecurity, because now it's not just data, but it's control of electricity. The stakes are quite high, and also privacy. I mean, this Both the power of this technology to give consumers the information to make choices, has the other side, which is there's a lot of data about what consumers are using with this, and we have to make sure that the consumer and the public utility interests are move hand, and that's why that stakeholder group was so large in smart grid. That's very important.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Biggert. Now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Nagelbauer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing. Dr. Gallagher, as you can imagine, right now is budget season in the United States Congress. Your president sent over his budget. We're going through the budget process, and everybody that's testifying, as you can imagine, understands the depth of our deficit problem. But what we still see is people coming over and saying, well, we still need more money. And I noticed that the budget that we're looking from NIST right now, basically you added some new programs, but we really didn't see very much reduction in the existing programs. If we're going to prioritize, how we spend the American taxpayers' money, by the way, and we don't have all of the money we're spending, we're borrowing 40 cents for every dollar we're spending. When does a department like yours start to take that leadership role and say, you know what, we're going to have to go in and prioritize our programs. We may not be able to do all of the things that we've been doing, and so we need to prioritize that. What did you go through that process?
Yes, sir, we did actually, and you're correct. In an environment like this, I would say the looking at internal efficiencies, looking at program efficiencies has been really unprecedented. I certainly appreciate the difficult task you have within Congress as this all comes up from different agencies to look at that. From the NIST side, what I can tell you is that we have in fact made probably the most significant priority decisions we've ever made. 2 of our 4 programs were terminated and defunded, or in fact 1 was terminated and 1 was moved entirely to private sector funding. We have reduced administrative programs by over $12 million within NIST and are continuing to make further cuts. We have been reprogramming activities within the agency. And I think the NIST budget request, and you're quite correct, it is significantly up, was done in the context of an overall discretionary budget request that it was flat. So what the administration has tried to do is make relative priorities within the Budget Control Act number that put a premium on some of the high growth, and I think the science and technology agencies have been the beneficiary of that.
So when you say you went through a very rigorous process to evaluate and to prioritize, what measures are in place today to evaluate these programs? I mean, and where can someone go and look at, the documentation, the evaluations?
So NIST looks at, because of the heterogeneous nature of the NIST programs, we evaluate them differently. So in the case of some of the technology transfer programs, we were talking earlier about the TIP or Advanced Technology Program that were NIST funded, these high-risk payoffs. We actually have metrics that look directly at the value generation of the companies that were started, the new revenue, the new products, new services. I just looked at a review last week that the overall return on investment for 36 companies we looked at was something like 27-1. In the case of our Manufacturing Extension Partnership Program, where we're providing services to small and mid-sized manufacturers, we look directly at jobs saved or created. We look at new investments, and there's a whole set of metrics that we provide there. We'd be happy to provide that. And the laboratory programs, it's a little bit more difficult because we're working farther upstream in the science and R&D side. We do a couple of things. One is to make sure that our work is meeting industry needs. So we do a lot of work looking at industry roadmaps and consortia and things of that type to make sure that the NIST programs are there. We look at the things we sell. We actually sell primary calibration services and standard reference materials. We're looking very carefully at that. And lastly, we also do economic impact studies where we do selective retrospective studies to look at the value of those programs. And we'd be happy to share all of that information with you.
Recently I was at a firm that does a lot of high-tech work and actually participates in some of the programs that you're talking about, and I posed this question to them, and I think it kind of caught them off guard. And the question that I asked them was, what if instead of you leveraging federal dollars, because many of them, they put the public-private partnership, rather than leveraging a small amount of your money with a large amount of federal money, what if we changed the corporate tax structure in such a way that most of the money was your money? Would you still be investing in those same kinds of research? Or because of the speculative level, would you, probably not? Because I think where we have to begin to look at it is, and when we prioritize how we spend American taxpayers' money, we have to make sure we're investing it in places where we get high degrees of return. And I submit to you that I think a lower corporate tax structure and allowing these companies to invest in the technology that they think has a longer promise puts a little of a market perspective over research and development, rather than trying to put together academic standards that these may or may not meet. What would be your response to that?
I would actually be in strong agreement. I think that in this space between the public sector and private sector, there's both pushes and pulls. I think that the market forces are incredibly important, possibly the most important. I think that's why the administration has also supported the R&D tax credit and looking at corporate tax reform for the very reasons you articulated. I also think that there's some cases push from the technology sector. What's happening in the labs opens up opportunities that the market may not see or understand, and so in some cases we have to make sure that those are made visible to them as well. And you're highlighting really one of the most important areas, which is this intersection, and how do we make this operate effectively without getting in the way of the market itself.
Thank you, Mr. Nagelbauer. Now recognize Mr. Holmgren for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple questions dealing more with manufacturing and jobs. The President stated in his State of the Union address, and I know you've reaffirmed in your testimony, I apologize, we had a couple other meetings going on at the same time, but I know you testified that one of the goals of this budget is to encourage high-tech manufacturing in the United States. I certainly agree with this admirable goal and want to be fighting for that as well, but wonder if any amount of federal spending on science and technology will lead to more high-tech manufacturing without significant regulatory and tax reform. So I wonder, can you provide us with your thoughts on this, as well as how to create the optimal environment to support high-tech manufacturing and job creation here in the U.S.? Since the U.S. has one of the highest corporate tax rates, do you believe we can attract business to the U.S. and keep them here without reducing regulation and reforming the tax code?
Great. Thank you very much. I certainly agree wholeheartedly that the set of conditions that a manufacturer will use to make a decision to site in the United States or to grow are more than just the R&D piece itself. And it's going to be access to the workforce. It's going to look at the tax and cost structure. It's going to be a whole host of things. And I think the NIST manufacturing effort should be viewed really in the fabric of a much larger effort that looks at how do we set the right macroeconomic conditions to support investments in advanced manufacturing and so forth. That includes trade, workforce, tax structure, and so forth. But I think that in the context of R&D intensive industries, ones that are really dependent on the flow of new ideas, there is an important touch point. And I think that setting the right structure is really about making sure that we both facilitate the scale-up problem, taking an idea from a lab and how does it look in full scale-up, which is often a very deep measurement problem. And the other one is getting the market right. And you're exactly right. Many of these new emerging technologies are touching potential regulatory issues. So if you look at biotech, where we are looking at the promise of an incredibly fast production of new biomaterials and new bioproducts, everyone concludes in this sector that I've talked to that we have to do something to make sure the regulatory process that protects the safety and efficacy of these materials keeps pace with that. And so what we're trying to do at NIST is to make sure that to the extent that this can be done through measurement, and the way to think of that is through quality control and quality assurance processes within the industry itself, that we might be able to set from technology side a better barrier so that we have smart and nimble regulation or requirements. One of the goals in standard setting is certainly, if industry has broadly adopted a set of practices that are self-protective, that goes a long way to addressing the type of breakdowns or market breakdowns you would where you would expect to look at regulation. So that's true in our nanotechnology, where we're looking at environment and safety and health issues. How do we measure within nanoparticles, and also looking at biotech.
You touched on this a little bit, but I guess just to delve in a little bit deeper, you've talked about a number of distinct manufacturing initiatives and programs that NIST supports. I wonder if you could give your view more broadly of the direction. I'm concerned about U.S. manufacturing and making sure that that is growing, that's a vital part of our economy, always has been, and I believe needs to be going forward. I wonder if you could kind of give your thoughts of how you see that going in the near future and then longer term from the work that you've been doing at NIST, but also just recognizing, do you feel like there is enough leadership coming from Washington, from agencies, from the administration on manufacturing, and how could the administration coordinate manufacturing activities amongst the different federal agencies more effectively?
I have to tell you that in my 18 years in the federal government, I've never been more optimistic about manufacturing than I am today. I think a tone has changed. I think for a while there was a feeling that it was just inevitable, that we didn't have to worry about manufacturing. We could simply invent it here and it would go somewhere else, and that was okay. I think that's changed. I think there's been a recognition, not just within the federal government, but every discussion I've had in Congress has sort of reaffirmed this, and most importantly, the business community has really stepped up and begun to make the case very strongly that there's a deep interplay between our capacity as a country to innovate and our capacity as a country to produce and benefit from those innovations. And in fact, we probably should have known this because our competitors were doing this to us. They would start with the low-end manufacturing, which had no R&D, and work their way up the value chain until they were eventually building out R&D infrastructure. And so that interplay was obvious to them, and I think we may have just taken it for granted since it had been such a core part of our strength for so many years. But I think that's really changed. I think the dynamic, as I said, is as robust as I've ever seen it. Now I think what we have to do is use that window of opportunity wisely and begin to craft some programs that work effectively, because as I said, the federal government doesn't manufacture anything. But what we want to do is make sure we're providing an environment that's conducive to that set of industries.
Just real quickly on that, is there some coordinated effort going on again amongst, I'm glad to hear of your optimism from your perspective, but is there some coordination as far as making sure that the effort really is being productive among different agencies from what you've seen?
Yes, the answer is, again, as much as I've ever seen. So when Secretary Bryson was confirmed as Commerce Secretary, he was made a co-chair of a new office called the Office of Manufacturing Policy. This was a cabinet-level group. In fact, I was at the first meeting. I had the privilege of sitting on the side wall while they met. And in fact, we've had vigorous and active participation by most of the cabinet, actually. It's been remarkable. The President himself is personally engaged in manufacturing. And at the working level in the advanced manufacturing space, NIST was named as the coordination agency. So we were given what was called a national program office to specifically provide the support for a robust all-of-government effort. And I would say routinely every day, one door down from my office, Mike Molnar, who heads that office, is coordinating with Defense and Energy and NSF. So it's extremely active at this time.
My time has expired. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Holmgren, and I want to thank Dr. Gallagher for his valuable testimony and the members for their questions. Members of the subcommittee may have additional questions for you, Dr. Gallagher, and we will ask you to respond to those in writing. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional comments and statements from members. The witness is excused. Thank you all for coming. The hearing is now adjourned.